The rain had been falling since before dawn, soaking the courtyard stones until they gleamed like cold mirrors. Inside the Whitmore estate, footsteps echoed down the marble hall, hurried, sharp, as if everyone was trying to outrun something they didn't dare speak of. At the end of that hallway, in a cramped service room that smelled faintly of damp linen, Eliza knelt beside a heavy chest of old silverware. Her hands, red from hours of scrubbing floors, trembled as she tried to polish each fork until it gleamed, exactly the way the madam demanded. She could hear them in the grand dining room, voices, low and bitter, the family she worked for, the family whose name she was never allowed to speak aloud, were gathered there now, their whispers slicing the quiet like knives. That girl, where is she? She shouldn't be here when the lawyer arrives. Keep her out of sight, she doesn't belong here. A door slammed. Eliza flinched, a drop of polish falling onto her dress, an old hand-me-down 2 sizes too big. She didn't even wipe it off. She was used to disappearing into corners, used to the way the other maids spoke her name like it was a stain that wouldn't come out. But today felt different. The air tasted heavier, like a storm ready to break inside these walls. She could feel it in her chest, something pushing against the ribs she kept so carefully guarded. A sudden shout rang out from the dining room. A chair scraped across the marble floor. "I won't accept it. Father would never—" Silence, heavy, suffocating. Eliza's breath caught. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the walls in this house were old, and secrets slipped through cracks like rain through a broken roof. She pressed her palm to the floor, steadying herself. She knew, without knowing, that something in that room had everything to do with her. She was the maid who shouldn't exist, the name no one spoke, the ghost at the edge of the family portrait. And tonight, as the rain hammered against the windows, she felt a strange truth settle into her bones. Sometimes the secrets we bury don't stay buried forever. The lawyer's voice carried through the corridor like a blade drawn too slowly from its sheath, polite, measured, but every word seemed to scrape raw the pride of those who sat around that long, polished table. Eliza stayed behind the kitchen door, back pressed against the cool wood. She shouldn't be here, she shouldn't listen, but her body refused to move, as if her bones knew this was the moment she'd been waiting for without ever daring to hope it would come. Inside the dining room, the family sat stiff-backed under the crystal chandelier. Madam Whitmore's fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the armrest, her pearls tight against the folds of her neck. Beside her, the eldest son, Richard, leaned forward, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed to slits. The lawyer cleared his throat. "According to the late Mr. Whitmore's final testament, the estate and assets shall be divided as follows. Ma?" He paused, letting the words hang like thunderclouds. No one breathed. "To his wife, Margaret Whitmore, to his son, Richard Whitmore." Each name struck the table like a gavel, predictable, expected. Then, a sound no one expected, the lawyer's pen tapped the parchment and he looked up, his voice steady but softer now. And to Eliza, the room erupted. Margaret's teacup rattled in its saucer, the porcelain trembling like her knuckles. "No, absolutely not," her voice cracked, thick with venom. "That girl is no one. She's a maid, a stray. She has no claim to this family." Richard's fist slammed down, making the spoons on the table jump. Father was delusional in the end. He didn't know what he was signing. The lawyer didn't flinch. He slid a second page across the table, a photograph clipped to it. In the photo, faded by years, a young woman held a baby swaddled in a soft blanket. Mr. Whitmore stood behind them, a hand resting gently on the woman's shoulder. This is his statement, handwritten, witnessed. He acknowledged her, he provided for her. A cold hush fell over the room. The rain outside battered the window panes harder now, like a furious chorus no one could drown out. Behind the kitchen door, Eliza's fingers curled into fists. Her chest rose and fell in shallow waves. It felt unreal. Her name, so long whispered only in scorn, now inked onto paper that made them all squirm. But she knew better than to feel safe. From the crack in the door she caught Margaret's eyes, sharp, gleaming like a dagger in candlelight. If hatred could kill, she would have fallen to the floor that instant. Margaret leaned forward, her voice low but seething. "Find her. Bring her here. Let's see if she dares to look me in the eye and call herself one of us." Eliza's breath hitched. She wasn't ready. But ready or not, the walls were coming down. The truth her father left behind was about to tear open every locked room she'd ever hidden in. And tonight, in this house that had always kept her in the shadows, her name would be spoken out loud for the first time. The footsteps came for her before she could even slip away. Heavy boots on the marble floor, the sharp clack of heels behind them. Eliza pressed her back to the pantry shelves, heart racing so hard she could almost hear it echo down the hallway, but it was useless. A rough hand grabbed her arm, yanking her out from the shadows as if she were nothing more than a stain on the wall. The butler, who had barked orders at her since she was barely old enough to lift a broom, sneered down at her. "The madam wants you in the dining room, now." He didn't let go, even as she stumbled, the edge of a crate scraping her hip. She wanted to protest, to say she shouldn't be dragged out like a thief, but her voice refused to come. After all these years of swallowing her words, she couldn't make them rise to her lips fast enough. They pushed her through the door. Warm golden light from the chandelier spilled across the polished table, the rain-soaked window panes, the expensive suits and silk dresses. And there, at the head of the table, sat Margaret Whitmore. Her eyes glowed cold as moonlight on a blade. Eliza stood trembling at the threshold, her thin dress damp at the hem, her hair escaping its bun. The other maids froze along the walls, eyes darting away. No one wanted to be seen watching this. Margaret spoke first. Her voice was sugar-dipped in poison. "So the ghost in my house dares show her face." Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He looked her up and down as if she were a stray mutt that had wandered in off the street. "Tell me, girl," he hissed. "How much did he pay you to forge this lie? Who helped you twist his mind?" Eliza's lips parted. She wanted to say, "I didn't, I never asked for this." But no sound came. Only the soft thunder of her pulse, the rain hammering the glass behind her. Margaret rose slowly from her seat, the pearls around her neck catching the light. "You think because he scribbled your name on a piece of paper that you belong here?" She stepped closer, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "You're dirt, a mistake he should have buried long before this. And now you stand here, in this room, wearing that name like you earned it?" Eliza's eyes stung. She willed herself not to drop her gaze. For so long she had learned to look at the floor, at the cracks in the marble, the edges of her own shoes. Tonight she forced herself to look back. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, the words so soft they barely reached the table. "I never asked for any of it." Margaret's hand shot out, grabbing her chin, fingers digging into her skin. "But you got it, didn't you? And now you'll learn nothing in this house comes free." Around them, the storm lashed harder, wind rattling the window frames like fists on a locked door. The lawyer stood silent, eyes lowered, the only witness to a truth that could not be unspoken now. In that moment, her face tilted up by a woman who would rather see her buried than breathing, Eliza felt the air shift inside her. The shame she had carried all these years cracked like thin ice under heavy boots. She was done bowing her head. Margaret's fingers dug into Eliza's jawline, nails biting into soft skin. The polished pearls around Margaret's throat seemed to tighten with every word she spat, her voice a low hiss, thick with hatred that smelled sweeter than her perfume. "Look at me when I speak to you. Do you really think a scrap of paper makes you one of us?" Eliza's eyes watered, partly from the pain, partly from the surge of memories pushing against her ribs like a tide that refused to stay buried. All the nights scrubbing these floors in silence, all the mornings watching him, the man they called father, pass by with a nod so small it felt like a secret between ghosts. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, the lawyer's eyes lowered but trembling, Richard's eyes narrowed like a knife's edge, the maids in the corners trying not to breathe too loudly, as if even the walls shouldn't dare hold this truth. For so long Eliza had taught herself that her voice didn't matter, that she was here to serve, to fold into shadows, to take the blame for broken dishes and dirty footprints. But tonight, with the storm raging outside like a promise that something must break, she felt her voice crawl up her throat. Margaret's grip tightened, her face so close Eliza could see the faint cracks of age in the powder on her cheek. "Say it," Margaret hissed. "Say you're no one, that you'll take what he left you and crawl back into the gutter you came from." Something snapped. It wasn't loud, no shout, no dramatic gasp, just a tiny sound like a glass bead cracking underfoot. Eliza raised her chin. It hurt. The bones in her jaw ached under Margaret's grip, but she forced her eyes up, past the pearls, past the painted lips, straight into the cold pit of the woman's gaze. Her voice was hoarse, but it cut clearer than the storm. "I am not no one." Margaret's fingers stiffened. A single breath. The room seemed to shrink around that small, impossible sentence. Eliza's shoulders trembled, but she did not drop her eyes. She tasted blood where her teeth pressed into her lip. "You can hate me," she whispered, every word a splinter pried loose from old wounds. "You can wish I'd never been born. But he wrote my name, he left me this, and I won't let you erase me again." Richard barked a harsh laugh, the sound of pride cracking under fear. "You think you're equal to us now? You think the world will bow to—" But Eliza didn't flinch. Outside, thunder rolled like a warning shot across the sky. The wind rattled the glass panes behind her, but she stood rooted, jaw bruised but lifted. She was done bending. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her name settle not like a chain, but like a key. A key she hadn't learned how to use yet, but one that was hers. Given, hidden, but never fully taken away. And across the table the lawyer looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. In that glance Eliza saw it, the truth, that no hand, no matter how manicured or cruel, could strangle forever. For a moment, just one fragile moment, the room fell silent after Eliza's words. Margaret's hand froze on her chin, the pearls at her throat no longer glinting like armour but strangling her own breath instead. Even Richard, mouth half open to sneer, swallowed his insult before it slipped out. But the hush didn't last. Rage rushes back in where fear cracks open the walls. Margaret's fingers snapped away, leaving white marks along Eliza's jawline. Her eyes narrowed not with doubt, but with a hatred sharper than any blade. She turned, chin lifted, eyes flashing to the lawyer like a whip. "Tear that page up," she hissed. "Burn it. I won't have this gutter girl's name soiling my family's bloodline." The lawyer held the parchment tight between his hands, knuckles white. A bead of sweat slipped down his temple. His lips parted, but before he could speak, Richard slammed his fist onto the table so hard the fine china rattled. "Take her out," Richard growled, his voice trembling with a fury that tasted like fear. "Drag her out, she's not staying another hour under this roof." A footman stepped forward, a man who, just this morning, had barked at Eliza to polish the floors she'd slept on. His hands clamped onto her shoulders, cold through the thin fabric of her dress. Eliza's breath caught. Her heartbeat hammered so loudly she couldn't hear the storm outside anymore. Only the storm in here, in the house that had been her cage and her grave and once her only home. She didn't struggle, she didn't beg. But as they dragged her backwards through the marble hallway, her eyes locked with the lawyer's. For a split second, he didn't look away. In his eyes she saw it. The truth he still carried, pressed tight between shaking hands. A promise unburned. A name that wouldn't die so easily. The grand front door flew open. Rain rushed in, wild and cold, slapping her cheeks as the footman shoved her out onto the front steps. The thunder above roared like a beast roused from sleep. Behind her, the door slammed shut, muffling the shrieks and curses that still tore through the hall. Eliza stumbled, bare feet sliding on wet stone. She looked back once, just once, at the house where she had cleaned floors on her knees, whispered prayers no one heard, and learned to live like a shadow. The storm swallowed her now, but in its roar she felt something she hadn't known she could feel out here in the cold. Freedom. Maybe it was bitter and soaked through to her bones. Maybe it tasted like betrayal and salt and rain. But somewhere deep under that fear, under the ache in her jaw and the sting on her skin, a single ember of something steady stayed alight. She would not vanish, not this time. And inside, the lawyer stood alone in the hall, the torn envelope hidden inside his coat. The real testament, the secret Margaret hadn't thought to search for. What was buried would not stay buried forever. The storm didn't let up that night. It pounded the iron gates of the Whitmore estate as if to mock the ones inside who thought their walls were strong enough to keep the truth out. And it hammered down on Eliza, where she sat huddled beneath the bare limbs of an old oak, not far from the servants' gate that had slammed shut behind her. Her thin dress clung to her skin like a shroud. The wind cut through her hair, dragging icy fingers along her bruised jaw. But her eyes, though rimmed red, stayed open, fixed on the gates that would not open for her again. She could have wept. She could have banged on the door, begged to be let back in, promised to stay silent. But she didn't. Her father's name, the name they spat like poison, burned too fiercely in her chest to be silenced again. Thunder cracked above her, so close it rattled her bones. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest. The world seemed to shrink to this patch of muddy ground, her heartbeat, and the pounding rain. And then footsteps, slow, careful, the crunch of gravel under steady boots. Eliza tensed, but she didn't lift her head until the voice came, soft, older, careful not to startle her. "Miss, you shouldn't be here alone." She looked up through a curtain of wet hair. It was Mr. Greaves, the old groundskeeper, the man who had once slipped her a crust of bread when she'd been too young to ask. He knelt beside her now, coat already soaked through, his hand resting on the muddy earth as if anchoring them both to something more solid than fear. "They told me you were gone," he murmured, "thrown out like rubbish. But you're not rubbish, Miss Eliza, not you." A sob threatened her throat, but she swallowed it back, pressing her lips together until her teeth ached. Mr. Greaves reached into his pocket, pulling out a tiny brass key, tarnished, cold from the rain. "I've kept your mother's room in the gardener's shed all these years, the one where he used to sit with her, when they thought no one saw. It's dry enough, warm enough for tonight." Eliza's eyes widened, lashes clumped with rain. Why would you help me?" Her voice cracked like the branches overhead. The old man's gaze didn't waver. He shrugged, rain dripping from his grizzled chin. "Because your father did more good for this house than they ever did. And you've done no harm to no one. I reckon that counts for something in this world." He held out his hand, rough, calloused, the lines of loyalty and quiet rebellion etched deep into his skin. Eliza stared at it, this small gesture against a world that had just slammed a door in her face. Then she slid her freezing hand into his palm. He squeezed once, not too tight, just enough to say, "I see you, I see who you are." Far behind them, inside those thick walls, the lawyer packed up his bag. Tucked within its lining was the real testament, signed, witnessed, sealed away. His eyes flickered to the window, to the flashes of lightning that lit up the garden where somewhere out there, a girl who had never mattered was beginning at last to matter to herself. Tonight the storm raged on, but in the cradle of an old shed, with the smell of wet earth and memory around her, Eliza curled into an old blanket that had once belonged to her mother, and for the first time, slept without waiting for someone to call her name like a curse. She would not be a ghost any longer. By the next morning, the storm had pulled back into a soft drizzle, a thin grey curtain hanging over the Whitmore estate, like a memory it couldn't quite wash away. Inside the gardener's shed, Eliza stirred awake beneath her mother's old blanket. The smell of damp earth and rotting wood stung her nose, but she didn't mind. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waking up to a voice barking orders or the scrape of brooms on marble. No footsteps coming to kick her awake. No madam's pearls clinking like a death knell. She sat up slowly. Her bones ached from the stone floor beneath the straw. Her jaw still throbbed where Margaret's fingers had bitten in. But beneath the bruises bloomed a new kind of ache, the one that said, "Get up, even if you're alone." Mr. Greaves knocked gently before slipping in. He brought with him a chipped mug of tea, still steaming, and a small sack of bread. "Best not to linger too long," he murmured, eyes darting toward the main house. "They'll come looking, or worse, send someone to hush you up." Eliza clutched the mug, warming her hands around it. She felt his warning settle in her chest, not like fear, but like fuel. "Let them come," she said, voice soft but unyielding. "I'm done hiding." That afternoon, word began to leak through the cracks that the Whitmore family had tried so hard to plaster over. Servants whispered by the stables. The cook's boy ran gossip to the village for an extra coin. "Did you hear? The old man left something for the girl, the one they threw out in the rain." Inside the house, Margaret's fury turned the air sour. Richard stormed from room to room, barking at maids to swear silence, but words, like cracks in a dam, don't close once they've tasted daylight. At dusk, the lawyer sat alone in his study, the real testament tucked safe behind a false drawer. He watched the candle flicker, imagining the storm of greed that would come for him if they learned he'd kept the truth. But he thought of the girl, of the way she had stood there, bruised but unbowed. And he knew some names deserved to be spoken, some truths refused to stay buried. That same night, Eliza crouched by the shed's small workbench, fingers numb but steady as she stitched the torn hem of her only dress. By lantern light, she patched every rip and scrape until the fabric looked almost new. Not because she believed a clean dress would make her one of them, but because she needed to look at herself and not see a ghost anymore. Through the cracked window she could see the silhouette of the grand house. Its windows glowed golden, the chandeliers lit like they always were. A world away, yet only a few paces down the garden path. She whispered into the hush, her breath turning to mist in the cold. "You can keep your walls, your gold, your pearls, keep your lies. I have my name now." And somewhere deep inside those stone walls, a door slammed. Margaret's voice cut through the corridors, shrill and slicing. "Find her, find that worthless girl before she finds her way back in." The storm outside had eased, but inside another storm was gathering. Quiet, stubborn, and impossible to silence. What they threw away would not stay gone forever. Days slipped by since that stormy night, but the sky stayed heavy, a low grey ceiling that seemed to whisper, "The real storm is yet to come." Inside the old gardener's shed, Eliza sat beside a flickering oil lamp. Her fingers were raw and cracked from scrubbing dishes at the village inn, taking whatever work she could find just to keep a scrap of bread in her pocket. But she didn't care how cold her hands were, as long as they were her own, no longer tied to a kitchen door that could slam shut behind her at any moment. A rusted gate creaked out in the garden. Footsteps crunched the gravel, hesitant but determined. Then a voice, low, careful, as if it feared the darkness might overhear. "Miss Eliza, please, it's Edmund." Edmund, the lawyer who hadn't looked away when the family spat her name like poison. Eliza pulled open the crooked door. In the lamplight, Edmund looked like a ghost. Coat dripping with mist, eyes red from nights he probably hadn't slept. Clutched in his hand was a faded envelope, edges frayed as if it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. He stepped inside, lowering his voice to a whisper. "They're watching me now. Richard has men on my steps, in my shadow. Margaret, she would crush me without blinking if she knew I still had this." Eliza's throat went dry. She stared at the envelope, small, unremarkable, but she could feel the weight of it from across the room. Edmund sank onto the old bench, rain dripping from his sleeves. "This isn't the testament itself," he said, his voice shaking just slightly. "It's a letter, your father's words, a name, someone who was there, who saw what they want buried." Eliza reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the paper. She wanted to ask why. Why risk so much for someone like her? But Edmund answered before she could speak. He gave a ragged laugh, the kind that catches on the edge of old regrets. "Because your father did more good for this house than any of them. And because he deserved better than to have his last wish shredded by people who live off his name." Outside, a wind rattled the shed walls. Somewhere beyond the garden, the grand house loomed, its windows aglow, its secrets festering behind polished doors. Eliza's voice came out as a whisper, cracked but steady. "What if they find out you helped me?" Edmund's eyes met hers, not with pity, but with something like defiance. "Then let them come for me. A lifetime spent bowing my head is enough. Sometimes you stand up because someone else couldn't." Before he left, he pressed the envelope into her hands, closing her fingers around it. "Guard this. When the day comes, stand where they can't silence you." When he slipped into the dark, Eliza sank onto the cold bench. She unfolded the letter with shaking hands. Inside, her father's handwriting. Lines faded by time, but the last words still clear. "One day, when you're ready, stand in the light. They can't bury you twice." And for the first time since they threw her out into the rain, she didn't feel small. She felt like a name they could never erase, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. The letter weighed heavily in Eliza's pocket as she stepped out of the old shed at dawn. The chill bit at her skin through her thin dress, but she didn't shiver. Not tonight. She had spent too many nights shivering under someone else's roof, too many mornings cleaning away footprints of people who never cared if she lived or vanished. Now she walked alone, the gravel path crunching under her worn shoes. Overhead, the trees shivered in the wind, branches black against the pale morning sky. In her pocket, her fingers brushed the edge of her father's letter. "One day when you're ready." She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she was done hiding in shadows. She reached the small iron gate at the edge of the Whitmore estate. Beyond it lay the village, the place where secrets travelled faster than wind. She needed answers. She needed to find the woman whose name was written in her father's hand, the last witness who could stand beside her when they tried to say she was nothing. She pushed the gate open. It squeaked loud enough to make her flinch. She took one step through, then froze. A crunch behind her, not the wind, not the trees. Footsteps. Eliza turned her head slowly. There, by the stone wall, half hidden in the brambles, stood a man in a dark coat, too well dressed to be a villager, too stiff to be a vagrant. He didn't move toward her, just stared, hands tucked into his pockets, like a wolf waiting for the lamb to run. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears. She forced her chin up. She wouldn't run. Running was what they expected. She stepped forward instead, pushing the gate all the way open. The man's eyes flickered. A tiny shift, but she saw it. He hadn't expected her to look him straight in the face. Their eyes locked, hers, rimmed with nights of fear she'd swallowed whole. His, cold and sharp, a dog on a leash that Margaret or Richard had surely set loose. Eliza took another step. She felt the letter press against her ribs, a fragile shield. If he lunged now, if he tried to snatch it, she knew she had no strength to fight him off. But something inside her said, "They can tear it from your hand, but they can't tear the truth from your mouth." The man didn't move. He only watched, as if weighing whether the girl before him was really the same ghost they'd thrown out into the rain. She walked past him. She could feel his gaze burning holes in her spine, but she didn't turn around. Out on the village road, the wind picked up, tugging at her hair. She didn't care if it carried her secrets with it. Let them try to stop her. She had a name now. She had a witness to find. And she had a promise that one day, when they stood in the same room again, she wouldn't be the one trembling. Behind her, the man pulled a silver watch from his coat pocket, flipping it open with a click. His eyes narrowed as he watched her disappear into the grey morning mist. Then he turned back toward the Whitmore estate, footsteps crunching like a warning through the sleeping garden. The village hall had never felt so small. It smelled faintly of old wood and ink, the air thick with whispered rumours that buzzed like wasps behind closed doors. But today the room was full. Every seat taken by neighbours, servants, villagers who'd once watched Eliza scrub steps in silence, all here to see the Whitmore family settle the scandal they couldn't keep hidden anymore. At the front, a long oak table. On one side, Margaret Whitmore, draped in black silk, her fingers twitching like claws beneath her gloves. Beside her, Richard, jaw tight as a vice, eyes flicking across the room like a cornered animal. And next to them, the lawyer, Edmund, his face pale but eyes steady, the letter tucked safe in a folder before him. Then there was Eliza. She stood alone, the only one without a lawyer, without a family crowding her shoulder. But she didn't look small, not anymore. Her dress was the same plain fabric, carefully mended at the hem. Her hair was pinned back neat, her bruises faded to shadows that made her eyes look sharper, clearer. One hand rested on the edge of the table, the other clutched the folded letter, the last thing her father had given her that Margaret's gold could never buy. The magistrate called for silence. The room fell still, the hush so heavy you could hear the wind outside brushing the window panes. Edmund rose first, his voice didn't shake. "This letter is in Mr. Whitmore's own hand. It names Eliza as his daughter. It names a witness, a midwife from the village, who can confirm what the family has hidden all these years." Margaret scoffed, the sound brittle as dry leaves. "A whore's child," she spat under her breath. "Not worth the paper she clings to." But Eliza didn't flinch. She turned her eyes, clear and calm, to meet Margaret's. When she spoke, her voice rang through the hall, quiet but cutting. "I never wanted your gold, I never wanted your name to poison mine, but I won't stand by while you tell the world I'm nothing." She laid the letter flat for all to see. Her fingers no longer trembled. "He wrote my name, he left it for me. You buried it once, you can't bury me twice." Gasps rippled through the villagers. A few servants exchanged glances, remembering nights they'd seen Mr. Whitmore slip into the garden shed with a girl barely older than Eliza was now. Richard slammed a hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This is madness. She's a liar, a maid. She seduced him." But the magistrate silenced him with a look. Then the door creaked open behind them, and an old woman stepped in, leaning on a cane, eyes cloudy with age but voice clear enough to cut the room in half. "I was there," the woman said, her eyes on Eliza. "I saw your mother bring you into this world, and I saw your father hold you like you were a piece of his soul." Margaret's knuckles whitened on her gloves. For the first time, her mouth fell open, but no poison came out. Outside, rain began to patter softly on the roof. Eliza felt it. That same storm that once washed her out the door now drummed like applause. She turned to the villagers, to the servants, to every face that had looked through her like she was dust on their boots. "I am my father's daughter, and I stand here today because he believed I should. You can hate me, you can cast me out again, but you will never say my name does not belong to me." Silence, deep, final, electric. Behind her, Edmund pressed a trembling hand to her shoulder, steady as an anchor. And across the table, Margaret's eyes darted from face to face. But there was no one left to glare into submission. For the first time Eliza saw it, fear, not hers, theirs. Outside the hall, the rain fell gentle and steady, washing the dirt from the doorstep, soaking into the ground where roots run deep. And as she stepped forward to sign her name, clear and true beside her father's, Eliza knew. No storm, no lie, no chain of pearls would ever silence her again. What I love most about this story, it doesn't rely on revenge or cruelty to deliver its power. Eliza wins not by destroying her enemies, but by standing in the light they always told her she didn't deserve. She reclaims what was rightfully hers, her name, her truth, her place. Some people will always see you as a mistake, something to sweep away like dust. But sometimes what they bury is not dead, it's alive, growing quietly under the weight of silence and shame. One day it breaks through, impossible to bury twice. No matter where you come from, your true worth is not decided by the people who try to hide you. The truth, and the courage to speak it, is the one thing they fear more than losing their gold or their pride. It's not just about secrets or inheritance, it's about how the smallest, quietest person in the room can stand tall enough to make those who wronged her tremble. It's about the power of a name that can't be stolen back, once you claim it for yourself. If you ever feel invisible, remember, what they tried to bury in you might just be a seed. And someday, you'll stand where no one can push you down again. Thank you for listening. And whenever you need another story to remind you that your worth cannot be erased, Rain Inside will be right here, waiting to whisper again.